The air in my room was heavy, thick with the weight of my thoughts. I sat cross-legged on the floor, a notebook spread open before me, its pages covered in careful, deliberate notes. The dim glow of my desk lamp flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. I wasn't sure how long I had been sitting there, but my legs ached from staying in the same position for too long. This wasn't just any night. This was the night I finalized my plan. For years, I had swallowed my anger, buried it beneath forced smiles and polite conversations. I had played the obedient daughter, the quiet observer, the one who never questioned, never fought back. But inside, I had been counting the days, waiting for the moment when I could finally take control. Tonight, the plan was taking shape. My stepfather had taken everything from me, my mother's love, my childhood, my sense of safety. He had wrapped himself in the image of a good man, a devoted husband, but I knew better. And now, I was ready. I reached for the small, worn envelope beside me, tracing its edges with my fingertips. Inside were the pieces of his carefully hidden secrets, the ones he thought I'd never find. But I had. And I would use them. Just as I was about to turn the page and refine my next step, the doorknob rattled. I froze. The door wasn't locked. I had been so lost in my thoughts, I hadn't thought to secure it. Then, the door creaked open. And there he was. I forced my breathing to steady as he stepped inside. His shadow loomed in the dim light, stretching across the floor toward me. I kept my hand still, carefully sliding my notebook just slightly under my leg. "You're up late," he said, his voice smooth, almost casual. But I knew better. There was always an edge to his words, an unspoken warning woven into the way he carried himself. I lifted my head, meeting his gaze with practiced neutrality. "Couldn't sleep." He studied me, his eyes flicking toward the notebook at my side. I willed my face to remain blank, to give nothing away. "Thinking about something?" he asked, taking a step closer. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I knew better than to let him see any trace of fear. Instead, I shrugged. "Just writing." He tilted his head slightly, pretending curiosity. "Writing what?" My mind raced. If I hesitated too long, he would know something was off. "Just journaling," I said smoothly. "You know, clearing my head." He let out a soft chuckle, one that never quite reached his eyes. "Always thinking, aren't you?" I hated the way he said it, like my thoughts were a joke to him. But I smiled anyway, a small, empty thing that meant nothing. He took another step forward, close enough now that I could see the faint hint of cologne on his shirt, the same scent I had come to associate with everything I despised. Then, without warning, he reached down and picked up the envelope. My heart lurched. I hadn't hidden it well enough. I kept my expression calm, but inside, everything in me screamed. "What's this?" he asked, turning it over in his hand. I forced a laugh, light and dismissive. "Old letters. Nothing important." For a second, he just looked at me, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. Then, slowly, he turned the envelope over again, as if deciding whether to push further. And then? He smirked. "Well, don't stay up too late," he said, tossing the envelope onto my desk, without opening it. "We wouldn't want you getting distracted." His words were laced with something unspoken, something that made my skin crawl. He turned and walked toward the door. I watched him go, not moving, not breathing, until the door clicked shut behind him. I exhaled shakily, my grip tightening into fists. That had been close. Too close. But if anything, it only confirmed what I already knew. I had to move faster. And I had to be careful. Because next time, he might not walk away so easily. I waited. My ears strained to hear his footsteps fade down the hall, my breath shallow as I counted the seconds. 5. 10. 15. Then, silence. Only then did I dare to move. I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled it back into my lap. He hadn't opened it. That was my only stroke of luck tonight. But his smirk, the way he had looked at me before leaving, it told me something else. He suspected something. I carefully tucked the envelope under my mattress, pressing it deep into the space where he wouldn't think to check. Then, I pulled my notebook back onto my lap and turned the page. The plan had to change. I had been preparing for this moment for months, gathering every detail, every scrap of information I could find. I knew where he went when he wasn't home. I knew the people he met, the ones who would never dare to cross him. I knew what he had done to my mother, the lies he had fed her until she could no longer tell reality from the twisted story he had created. But I also knew something else. I knew his secret. The one thing that could bring everything crashing down around him. I flipped through the pages of my notebook, stopping at the list I had written weeks ago. Names. Dates. Evidence. I needed to act soon. But I couldn't afford a mistake. He was already watching me. A sharp knock at my door made me jump. Lights out, his voice came from the other side. I swallowed hard. Okay. I waited until I heard him step away, until I was sure he was gone, then slowly closed my notebook. Tomorrow, I would set everything in motion. Tomorrow, he would learn what it felt like to be powerless. And when it was over, he would never hurt anyone again. The next morning, I woke with a clear goal. No more waiting. No more second-guessing. If I hesitated now, I would lose my chance. I dressed carefully, choosing the plainest clothes I owned, nothing that would draw attention. Then, I reached under my mattress and retrieved the envelope. My fingers traced its edges, feeling the weight of everything inside. It was all there. Photos. Records. A letter from someone who had once been in my place, someone who had suffered under him but had been too afraid to speak. I had found it tucked away in an old storage box in the attic, hidden beneath a pile of forgotten things. The words on the yellowed paper had shaken me to my core. I know what he is. But I can't fight him. If you find this, maybe you can. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. I didn't know who had written it, but I had an idea. It had been left for someone like me. Someone who saw behind his mask. And now, I would do what they couldn't. I tucked the envelope into my bag and slipped out of my room. The house was silent, sunlight streaming through the curtains in thick golden beams. My mother was already gone for work, which meant it was just him and me. I moved quickly, heading toward the front door. If I could just make it outside. Going somewhere? My stomach turned to ice. I turned slowly to find him leaning in the doorway of the kitchen, a coffee mug in his hand, watching me. He wasn't dressed for work yet, which meant he was planning to stay home. Bad. That was bad. Just out for a walk, I said, keeping my voice casual. His gaze drifted to my bag. Since when do you take your bag for a walk? I forced a laugh, shrugging. I was going to stop by the library. He took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't believe me. I could tell. All right, he said finally, his voice light, but there was something else there, something calculated. Don't be out too long. I nodded and forced myself to turn away, my pulse hammering as I stepped outside. Only when the door closed behind me did I let out a breath. I had to be careful. I needed to move fast. I walked to the bus stop, keeping my head down. I could feel the weight of the envelope in my bag, like a second heartbeat against my side. I had planned my destination days ago, a small office in the city, one that handled reports like mine. They had seen cases like this before. I had checked. But as I reached the stop and waited for the bus, a prickle ran down my spine. I turned my head slightly, glancing behind me. And there he was. Standing just a block away. Watching me. My breath caught in my throat. He had followed me. I turned back quickly, forcing myself to stay still, to act as if I hadn't seen him. My heart pounded. I had expected him to be suspicious, but not like this. I couldn't go to the office now. If he followed me all the way there, he'd know. And if he knew, No. I had to lose him. The bus arrived, and I stepped on, my hands gripping the strap of my bag tightly. As the doors closed, I risked one last glance out the window. He was still there. Still watching. And then, to my horror, he smiled. I got off 3 stops early, my heart racing. I couldn't go straight to my destination anymore. I needed a new plan, and I needed it fast. I ducked into a crowded coffee shop, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. I couldn't call the office. What if he had somehow tapped my phone? I didn't know what he was capable of. Instead, I sent a message. I need to talk. In person. Urgent. The reply came within minutes. Where? I hesitated before typing the name of a park near the river. Public, open, safe. At least, I hoped it would be. I left the coffee shop through the back entrance, taking a winding route through side streets, constantly glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, lurking just out of sight. By the time I reached the park, my nerves were frayed. I spotted the person I had messaged sitting on a bench near the water, their expression already worried as they saw me approach. "You look like you've seen a ghost," they said. "Not a ghost," I said, sinking onto the bench beside them. "Something worse." I pulled the envelope from my bag and handed it over. "Everything's in there," I said. "Proof. Names. Everything." They took it, flipping through the contents, with wide eyes. "This is..." "I know," I cut in. "That's why I need your help." They looked up at me, their expression turning serious. "Are you sure about this? Once we move forward, there's no going back." I swallowed hard. "I'm sure," I said. And I was. Because if I didn't act now, I might not get another chance. And next time, he wouldn't just be watching. I sat on the bench, trying to steady my breath as the wind carried the sound of rustling leaves through the park. My hands were still trembling, but I clenched them into fists to stop it. I had made it this far. There was no turning back now. The person beside me, Jordan, flipped through the contents of the envelope with growing unease. I had chosen them for a reason. They had been close to my family once, before my stepfather had driven them away. They knew what kind of man he was, and more importantly, they weren't afraid of him the way my mother was. This is worse than I thought," Jordan murmured, I scanning the pages. They looked at me sharply. "You've been collecting this for how long?" "A while," I admitted. I had to be sure. I had to have enough. Jordan exhaled, shaking their head. "You do. This is enough to ruin him. But he's not just going to sit back and let this happen. You know that, right?" I nodded. "That's why I need your help." Jordan closed the envelope and held it tightly. "You trust me with this?" "I don't have anyone else." They were quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll take it to someone who can use it." "But what about you? You can't go back there." I swallowed hard. That was the one part of my plan I hadn't figured out. I had hoped to buy myself some time, but after this morning, after he followed me, I knew my time had already run out. Jordan must have seen the hesitation on my face, because their expression darkened. "He suspects you." I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, I figured that out when I saw him watching me from down the street." Jordan cursed under their breath. "That's bad." "I know." We sat there in silence for a moment, both of us weighing the danger of what we were about to do. Then Jordan straightened. "You need a place to go," they said. "Somewhere he won't find you." "I need to go back to the house first," I said. Jordan looked at me like I was insane. "Are you serious?" "I don't have a choice," I said firmly. "I have to make sure my mother is safe. And I have to act normal, at least for one more night." Jordan hesitated. "That's risky." "I don't care," I said. "This is the only way." Jordan studied me for a long moment, then finally sighed. "All right. But if anything goes wrong, you call me. No hesitation. I nodded, my stomach twisting into knots. I will. Jordan stood, tucking the envelope under their arm. I'll handle this. You just focus on getting through tonight. I didn't watch them leave. I couldn't. Instead, I sat there for a few minutes longer, trying to convince myself that I was ready for what came next. Then, I got up and started walking home. The sun was already beginning to set when I reached the house. The windows glowed with warm light, but it felt hollow, false. I took a deep breath and pushed open the front door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The house was too quiet. My mother was usually in the kitchen at this hour, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. But there was no sound of chopping, no clatter of dishes. Just silence. I stepped forward cautiously. Mom? No answer. A prickle of fear crawled up my spine. I moved through the house slowly, every instinct screaming that something was off. When I reached the kitchen, I froze. There, sitting at the table, was my stepfather. He wasn't reading the newspaper. He wasn't watching TV. He was just sitting there, staring at me. Waiting. My throat tightened. Where's Mom? He smiled, slow and deliberate. Out. A single word. But it sent a cold dread through my veins. I forced myself to stay calm. Out where? He tilted his head. You ask a lot of questions. I swallowed hard. She didn't say anything about going out. His smile didn't fade, but something in his expression shifted. You've been busy today. My heart slammed against my ribs. He knew. I don't know what you mean, I said carefully. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Come on. You don't think I noticed? Sneaking around, running off with that old friend of yours. My stomach dropped. Let's not play games, he continued. Why don't you tell me what you've been up to? Every muscle in my body screamed at me to run. But I couldn't. If I ran now, I wouldn't make it out the door. I had to play along. I forced a small laugh, shaking my head. You're being weird. I told you, I just went to the library. His eyes locked onto mine, searching. Then, he smiled again. But this time, it didn't reach his eyes. You know, he said casually, standing up, your mother's not as strong as you think. Ice flooded my veins. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He walked toward me slowly, each step measured. She needs me. She's fragile. She wouldn't do well if something disrupted her life. My hands clenched at my sides. Are you threatening her? His smile widened. Of course not. I'm just reminding you that people like her, they break easily. I felt sick. He was warning me. Telling me that if I did anything, if I exposed him, my mother would suffer for it. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. Where is she? He stopped inches from me, looking down with that same infuriating smirk. She'll be home soon, he said softly. Until then, why don't we sit and have a little talk? I swallowed back the panic clawing at my throat. He had the upper hand. And he knew it. But what he didn't know, what he could never guess, was that I wasn't afraid of him anymore. And no matter what it took, I was going to bring him down. Even if it meant burning everything to the ground. I sat across from him, my hands folded in my lap, to hide the trembling. He watched me like a cat watching a trapped bird, knowing it couldn't escape. You've changed, he said after a moment, his voice almost amused. Used to be so quiet. So obedient. I forced a shrug. People grow up. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. That's true. But they also learn their place. A chill ran down my spine, but I refused to let it show. Where's Mom? I asked again. His smirk faltered just slightly, and I knew I had hit a nerve. She's with a friend, he said, waving a hand dismissively. I told her she needed some time away to clear her head. Rage boiled inside me, but I kept my expression neutral. He had sent her away. Isolated her. That meant he didn't want her around for whatever came next. I needed to stay in control. I should call her, I said. His smile returned. No need. She'll be home soon enough. But you and I, he tapped a finger on the table. We have unfinished business. I swallowed hard. Like what? He tilted his head, pretending to think. Like what you were really doing today. I forced a small laugh. You think I did something? I know you did. His eyes darkened. You're not as clever as you think. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. Then prove it. A tense silence stretched between us. He hadn't expected me to push back. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the moment of hesitation. He wasn't sure. He suspected me, but he didn't know what I had done, or how much I knew. That was my only advantage. I stood up slowly, keeping my movements calm. If we're done here, I'd like to go to my room. He stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. Go ahead. But don't think this is over. I turned and walked away, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run. But I didn't. Not yet. I reached my room, closed the door, and locked it. My breath came out in shaky gasps as I pressed my back against the door. He knew I was up to something. He was watching me. I had to act now. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Jordan. He knows. I don't have much time. The reply came almost instantly. I'm on my way. Be ready. I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. This was it. The final move. One way or another, it ended tonight. I paced the length of my room, my mind racing. Jordan was coming, but I didn't know how much time I had before my stepfather made his next move. He wouldn't just sit back and wait, he was already suspicious, already looking for a reason to act. I needed to be ready. I grabbed my backpack and stuffed in the essentials, my phone charger, a change of clothes, and the little cash I had stashed away. Then, I pulled open my nightstand drawer, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the small pocket knife I had hidden there weeks ago. I hesitated. I didn't want to use it. But if it came down to it, I wouldn't hesitate. A sudden knock on my door made me jump. I shoved the knife into my pocket and took a deep breath before opening the door, just enough to see him standing there. His expression was unreadable, but I saw the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. Dinner's ready, he said simply. I forced myself to nod. I'll be down in a minute. He didn't move. For a moment, we just stared at each other, a silent battle playing out between us. He was testing me, waiting to see if I would break, if I would give away whatever I was planning. I didn't blink. Finally, he let out a low chuckle and stepped back. Don't keep me waiting. He turned and walked away, and only then did I allow myself to exhale. I had to get out of here. I grabbed my bag and checked my phone. A new message from Jordan. Outside. Back door. I didn't waste another second. I switched off my bedroom light and eased open the window, glancing down. It wasn't a far drop, but the bushes below would make too much noise. The back door was a better option. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped out of my room and made my way down the hall. The house was dimly lit, the only sound coming from the kitchen where he was probably waiting for me. I took a slow breath and stepped lightly down the stairs, keeping close to the wall where the boards wouldn't creak. My fingers curled around the strap of my bag as I reached the bottom. The back door was just a few feet away. I moved quickly, gripping the handle and turning it. Locked. Panic flared in my chest. It was never locked. He had done this on purpose. A slow creak came from behind me, and I knew. He was there. You're not going anywhere, he said softly. My blood turned to ice. I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs as I faced him. He stood between me and the front of the house, arms crossed, his expression eerily calm. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" he continued, stepping closer. "You've been planning something. I can see it all over your face." I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. "You're paranoid." He laughed, shaking his head. "Am I?" His gaze dropped to my bag. "Then why are you packed?" I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that would convince him otherwise. He took another step toward me. I stepped back, my fingers twitching toward my pocket. Then, a sound outside. A soft shuffle of footsteps near the fence. Jordan. His eyes flicked toward the noise, and in that second, I made my move. I yanked the pocket knife from my jacket and flipped it open, pointing it straight at him. He stopped. His eyes darkened, his lips curling into something close to amusement. "You're full of surprises," he murmured. I didn't respond. My grip tightened on the knife. "Move." He didn't. Instead, he tilted his head, as if considering something. "You think that scares me?" I swallowed hard. "It doesn't have to. Just move." For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, his expression shifted. The amusement faded, replaced by something cold, something unreadable. "You've been a problem for a long time," he said quietly. "I should have dealt with you sooner." Fear quelled around my throat, but I didn't let it show. Then, before I could react, the front door burst open. "Jordan. Run!" Jordan shouted. I didn't think, I just moved. I lunged past him, dodging his outstretched hand as I bolted toward the door. He grabbed at my arm, but I twisted away, nearly stumbling in my rush to escape. Jordan was already halfway out the door, holding it open as I threw myself through it. We didn't stop running. Not until we were far from the house, from him, from the life I was leaving behind. Not until I was finally free. We didn't stop until we reached Jordan's car, parked a few streets away. I collapsed into the passenger seat, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Jordan locked the doors immediately and turned to me. "Are you okay?" I nodded, though my hands were still shaking. He knew. He locked the doors. He was waiting for me. Jordan cursed under their breath and gripped the steering wheel. "We need to go. Now." The car roared to life, and Jordan pulled away from the curb, taking a winding route through the streets to make sure we weren't being followed. I stared out the window, my mind spinning. I had done it. I had escaped. But it wasn't over. Not yet. I turned to Jordan. "Did you give them the evidence?" Jordan nodded. "It's in the right hands now." A weight lifted off my chest. My stepfather's secrets were no longer mine to carry. Now, it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart for him. And I would be there to watch. The call came 2 days later. Jordan and I had been lying low, staying at a safe place far from my stepfather's reach. Every hour that passed felt like waiting for a storm to hit. And then, it did. Jordan answered the phone, their expression shifting as they listened. I sat up, heart pounding. When they hung up, they turned to me. "It's done." I swallowed. "What happened?" "They got him. The evidence was enough. He's been arrested." I let out a shaky breath, my whole body suddenly feeling light. It was over. For the first time in years, I was truly free. Jordan smiled. "You did it." I closed my eyes, letting the reality sink in. It wasn't just me. It was the people who had helped me. The voices that had been silenced for too long. And now, he was the one who had lost everything. Justice had finally come. And I was ready to start again.